Welcome to Peacebuilding Initiatives, a space where we explore collaborative paths to nurture healthy, positive relationships through dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and the courageous work of shifting our own perspective. Thank you for joining us today. My name is José Barzola. In this episode, we are having a conversation on fear, othering, and the architecture of peace. We explore how fear, how personal and systemic shapes conflict, fuels division, and often becomes the greatest barrier to sustainable peace, as well as how courage, dignity, and the shared interest can be intentionally cultivated in response. We were joined by a good friend of the podcast, Dr. Jude Antonyappan, who brings deep experience in cross-sector collaboration, systems thinking, and strategic leadership. She works bridges her work bridges disciplines and communities, helping organizations navigate complexity and design more humane, resilient systems for collective well-being. Thank you, Jude, for being with us today again. It's really an honor to have these conversations, especially I find that every time we come together, it's timely with, unfortunately, the chaos or the sadness, the multiple, there's so many words to describe, but I always appreciate our gatherings to take a deep dive into the issues that are impacting us daily. So thank you so much for being here today. And
so happy to be here, Jose. Thank you.
And to get us started, we're going to talk a little bit about framing fear and peace. When you hear the phrase, the architecture of peace, what does it evoke for you? And where does fear show up in that architecture?
That's an excellent question. The word architecture comes from the Greek, right? And the Greek word architekton, which is essentially under the direction of a chief, a master, a constructionist, or a carpenter, that a process unfolds itself and comes together. So when we talk about, fear having a part or an integral part within the architecture of peace, we are trying to fathom the various components that go into a peace process. And there is no room for toxic fear in that process, but there is room for adaptive fear. So there are different kinds of fear. And whereas we have this adaptive fear as a mechanism to restore our sense of being able to defend ourselves and to survive and to be able to, assess our short-term situations and make informed decision. Toxic fear can be chronic, and it could be sometimes devoid of the realities of the situation, and it could be stress-inducing, and it could act as antithetical to the peace-building process. That's where we ought to understand not just the antecedents of toxic fear, those who engender toxic fear in societies, and those who profit from such engenderment of toxic fear, and those who also are destroyed by toxic fear. So those are the fundamental components we'll delve further in this podcast. Yes.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for breaking that down for our listeners. In your experience, how does fear quietly shape conflicts long before people ever come to the negotiation or mediation table?
Again, another excellent question, because we are social beings as human beings, and we are creative beings. We love to create, and we are playful beings, and we are spiritual beings, and we are also productive beings. And fundamentally, we are empathetic, and we prefer peace over hate and war. However, historically, human history is replete with instances of conflict. And if you go to the roots of conflict, whether it's the Roman culture or Indian culture or the predominant cultures of Latin America or Africa, in Australia, there has been always conflict where one group comes and replaces another group and tries to take over the resources of the other group that was already there, and try to create an illusion of development and try to create an illusion of peace. A good example being Thanksgiving. Like, we have this notion of, Native Americans, the indigenous population sharing of course that happened, but we don't discuss the antecedents to that peacemaking process and how well-developed cultures have been named as savages, or and those who arrived did not mind othering, which is another phenomenon related to this process of the resistance to peace building, as well as process of creating fear before individuals come to the table for negotiation. So in othering, as it happened with the indigenous populations and those countries that colonized, developing countries and other parts of the world, they othered the population that they wanted to control as somehow inferior, and created this us versus them process, us versus them mentality, which helped in dehumanizing the population that they wanted to control. So at the micro level, you probably experienced this, Jose, when you do a family mediation. The husband and wife, these are two individuals who are at one point in time were in love, one would assume, and decided to commit to each other, and until death meets them. But somewhere along the line, they decided they are not meant for each other, and so they decide to separate. But the level of hate and animosity that they come to the process is not so much as their particular interest. Often their interest would be that they want to live peacefully. They want to coexist, especially if they have children, who have joint custody of their children. And they want to share the custody in a way that's beneficial for the children and not have hate or animosity. But already their reactions to the process of othering each other, here also they other each other, and especially if there is infidelity involved, there is tremendous amount of being cheated out of their relationship. And so there are so many factors that interact simultaneously. And as mediators, we want to help them understand what are their interests in this process, as opposed to their positions on their respective, status in life, respective acts in life, and respective consequences of those acts. So when we look at it from that perspective at the micro level, the same applies to meso level as well. So even before two parties come to have an agreement, they would fundamentally thrive on dividing themselves even more, and trying to get the best out of the mediation and the negotiation process for themselves. And then also, not being interested in sustainable solutions to their conflict resolution, but rather, short-term solutions. We just want this piece of land, like what Ukraine and Russia are doing now. In Russia, millions of Russians have lost their lives. Close to about 2 million individuals have been impacted through casualties, through injuries, and in Ukraine, about 0.8 million, lives are impacted. Oh, for what? For pieces of land? And hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children have been forcibly removed. And who are the architects of such hatred between two nations?
And this
Are
is
they the people, or are they the leader of one country who feels that the greatness of his country should be restored in the world scene? And that again is a short-term, short-lived vision, because if he is willing to acknowledge the fact that his country had at one point greatness, but now it has lost it and it doesn't have level playing field, that United States has accumulated all the power and it's a unipolar, so on and so forth. It's a complex question, no doubt about it. But there are individuals who feed on this divisiveness and who create further conflict. And so it goes from micro level to meso level to macro level. And every circumstance there is, even before they come to the negotiating table, like we have had series of negotiations, for instance, between the Ukrainian team and the Russian party, but all of them have failed to arrive at a solution that would stop this madness. It's madness, killing each other's citizens and impacting children, their future generations, mothers grieving their sons.
I think just to jump in really quickly, I think what's I find disheartening is that the bottom line it comes down to is resources.
Yes.
I find a lot of wars, a lot of, just the chaos that's happening between different countries. It's somebody wants the land because there's resources. There's something out of it. I mean, they can either approach it through a negotiation and find some middle ground where they can barter, or through brute force, you can go in and try to just take over and do with as you please. And it's this cycle of oppression, of war that's been going on for ages, for centuries. And in some way, I would like to think that in some capacity, have we evolved at all? Like our ancestors from like 400 years ago, maybe not directly our ancestors, but like, our human ancestors collectively as a whole, because, just with the mindset that we are all interrelated in some capacity. And these borders that are created just kind of creates more. Oh, was it? There was I remember hearing something about like, I think it was like an astronaut, like when you're in space, you can't distinguish where the borders are. It's just one unified planet. And it truly has shifted a lot of people's perspectives who've gone out and, it's not so much like, oh, I am the US astronaut. I am the astronaut from China or Russia. It's like, oh no, we're here and we also have to be relying on each other to be able to make it back. And so it's I just why do you think fear is so often overlooked or unexplored in peace building and ADR practice? I mean, is it sometimes as I was thinking about this question, I was thinking talking about fear sometimes perpetuates this concept that we're weak, that we're not strong, as opposed to like, sometimes we talk about like lean into that discomfort. What can we learn from that? And I don't know if that's why ADR, because people come to ADR practitioners to assist them with like a negotiation, a mediation, a facilitation. But if we were to be like, well, I don't feel comfortable with this, or like, I guess does this come down to like, is it just like a business thing where it's like, oh, we might lose the business or we might lose that project. They'll go to somebody else who doesn't acknowledge that, and we'll just figure it out. I don't know. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think fear is unacknowledged in the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms.
Yeah.
Fear is represented by pain, right? And so it's more acceptable to acknowledge pain from certain interactive processes between the individuals, whether it's between a husband and wife, or whether it's between a parent and a child, or between two communities. They hurt us, that they don't have any shame in sharing that they are hurt, but they are very reluctant to acknowledge. We are afraid, we are afraid. But let's think about it. For instance, intimate partner violence, right? IPV, domestic violence. There is tremendous amount of fear. Women who have experienced it, and it's not just women who experience intimate partner violence, although majority of the victims of intimate partner violence are women. Men also experience it. But let's say a mother and her children and a spouse who doesn't have a good work condition. And so as the defense mechanism, displacement goes. The husband has a bad day at work. He comes home. He decides himself upon himself to take it out on his wife and children. So the wife is used to this pattern, and he is unable to find a different job, or doesn't want to find a different job. He thinks his home is his castle, his kingdom, and therefore he can do whatever he wants to do. And so he would find any excuse to physically batter the wife. And the children witness this, and they learn to hide when this begins to happen, and they grow up with the trauma. So there's a tremendous amount of pain, and the wife would eventually learn to adjust herself and constantly walks on eggshell, thinking when he's going to explode. And that kind of micro level fear is followed by fear engineering mechanism, is followed by dictators at the macro level. So the wife may be willing to accept the fact that she is afraid of her husband. The children would be eager to accept the fact when they go to a therapist that they are afraid of their father. But citizens are not easy to accept the fact that they are afraid of their leader. Just like, because they say that would demand that they take action, right? Especially in democracies. And so, for instance, Martha Nussbaum, who absolutely a phenomenal thinker, and she talked about, in the what is it, the monarchy of fear. That's the title of the book. And she says fear prevents citizens from engaging in constructive dialogue across divisive parties or across different people with a different worldview, because tyrants and dictators try to create the fear of other by othering themselves, like saying one particular party is completely unworthy, when the leader who is elected and who is supposed to represent the entire country, sides with a certain ideology that is not even the majority ideology, but he is somehow the current leader by various means in many countries. So right now, in many parts of the world, there are many conflicts. We have 56 to 61 conflicts raging, and there are tyrants, in all parts of the world. So tyrants prevent people from having conversations with each other through fear. And but fear is difficult to acknowledge, just as it is difficult to be experiencing, because people are willing to present fear as pain, other than saying, oh, we wouldn't go to certain parts of the city at night. And that is, something Glassner explored, Barry Glassner, on the culture of fear in America, because 1 in 4 Americans now report as being more fearful than they were before. He, of course, published his book in the late 2000s, and he sort of ascribes this increase in fear to the various presentations by the mass media, and like we talked about before this podcast, and how this 24-hour news cycle just focuses on everything that's bad happening in the country. And likewise, the leaders who try to constantly, diminish each other and constantly play the people as pawns in their political games. So when we look at the processes of othering, and when we look at the processes of belonging, like in our country, for instance, what are the processes that are being used to other people? Like, the leaders may come and say, oh, Haitians kill and eat dogs, or migrants are rapists. Or these are all statements completely based on false thinking and infactual, understanding, and not based on facts. And these are just extreme examples. And there are several other examples that are there propagated by the leaders who are supposed to help people belong as a community, as a humanity, as brothers and sisters in this, as you said, Jose, in this tiny little planet. As my mom always said, remember, we are just one of the 9 planets going around one star when there are trillions of stars like that. She didn't know trillions, she would say multitudes of stars. And imagine a God, because she was such a spiritual person, who created all this. How much, and if you truly believe we are created in the image of God, or you evolved in the image of God, whether you believe in evolution or creation or intelligent design or whatever it is, that human beings don't even understand 1% of the magnificence that we are, in the absolute, marvel that we are. And we therefore need to at least elect leaders who have an iota of that magnificence in their conscious mind to be able to bring people together. Destruction of societies happen because of false leaders, historically everywhere. Most recent one being what happened with World War II and the Nazis and Hitler. We have enormous examples. Stalin, for instance, 20 million Russians died. 6 million members of the Jewish community alone died as a kind of, not died, murdered by the Nazis. And to believe that even it is possible for human beings, current so-called educated people, to support a fascist regime, to support the ideology of Nazis, anyone who used the Nazi symbol, is to wonder, do they have any humanity in them? And what kind of a leader would consider them as capable of, decency and empathy and fellowship with our fellow brothers and sisters? So fear is being used to other fellow citizens. We should all be one family and one nation in the United States of America, and one, members of this humanity of this planet. It's possible to live peacefully. I don't think we have scarcity of resources. Probably it was the case before, but now we have enough money to feed every child on this planet. We don't need leaders who instruct people to throw the medicine, tons and tons of medicine in the ocean, rather than give to poor members of other communities, children who have died. Hundreds of thousands of children have died
Even
because we have
though,
stopped USAID.
yeah,
Sorry, yeah, go
no,
ahead,
no, I
brother.
was just thinking, what you
Yeah.
just mentioned as far as like resources, but it is very much this going back to basics. It feels like just survival of the fittest, as opposed to, once more, it's shifting the mind of not focusing on community or being one unified planet, but it is like, oh no, it is our nation. And even within our nation, like, our people who think like us, and survival of the fittest. Like, this is kind of just goes back to, like, caveman age of like, who can best prepare, who can best fight, who can right. Like, if you think about like history, like the Roman Empire, it was the strongest survived. Those were the ones that were provided the resources to, you know but yeah, it is, it's it's disheartening. It's sad because, like, how many centuries are we apart from those moments, but we're still there. We're just, yeah, we have technology and we have um books, and there's things in our lives that are different than back in the day, but at the core, people are just going back to like basic instincts.
I don't
It's
think so. I think
You don't
we
think
ought to
so?
question when we say survival of the fittest has been the least misunderstood concept. I mean, social
Okay.
Darwinism, for instance,
Okay.
social Darwinism says that, well, if people are falling behind in their rent, if people are not able to afford their food, that shows that they're not working hard enough. That shows that they are not fit to withstand the competition of the modern capitalistic mode of production and consumption and so on and so forth. But there are societies in our very own time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're perfect by any means, but Denmark, for instance, or Norway, I mean, they do have problems, but at the same time, the level of impoverishment that we find in the United States is unseen in Norway, unexperienced in Denmark. In Denmark and other places, some of the other Scandinavian countries, children are expected to learn empathy. It is taught in school as part of their curriculum, and competition is discouraged as opposed to cooperation. Collaboration is enhanced. And so they have far less crime. They have far less social strife. In fact, Denmark has consistently been, as a nation, either first or second in the happiness index of the people with most level of happiness. And after all, what do we want as human beings? To be able to actualize our potentials, to live a happy, peaceful, content life. So therefore, those who advocate this, social Darwinism, or survival of the fittest, or boogeymen who want to encourage this a sense of inadequacies among their own members of the community. But if we think about, is it survival of the fittest for someone to have, billions of dollars, and someone to have a 50-bedroom mansion when a hardworking American family lives in one bedroom? They're working hard, both the husband and the mother, to 20,
I mean, it's
40
greed.
hours of
It's
the day.
basically just greed.
It's
capitalism. It's like,
exactly. Yeah.
even though you are the richest, or in the top 10, 100 richest people in the world, you can always have more.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's not survival
Yeah.
of the fittest. That's survival of the pathological. That is survival of the narcissist. That is survival of the greedy. That is survival of those who use other people's toil to enrich themselves and use that resources for their so-called quote unquote recreation, that many of which now we know also violates other people's rights, including children's lives. So therefore, we ought to question the basic premises of our society. And when they perpetrate these injustices and these perversions, under pseudo, psychological concepts, they are actually violating. And when they use spirituality to justify their, unjust ways of living, we ought to really question, how is fear playing a role in othering? Like those who claim, for instance, Alex Peretti's life, the process, his life was taken away so sadly. Renee Good, a mother whose life was taken away, that those were artificially generated videos, and they want to laugh it off. And, I want to cry just at that dismissiveness, that human beings, my fellow brothers and sisters, are capable of such dismissiveness of the value of life. A child orphaned, friends, grieving, loss of a dutiful nurse who took care of so many veterans who sacrificed their lives for our country. So people are not encouraged to delve into these mechanisms, our fundamental assumptions of our society, but they are encouraged to be furthermore divisive and furthermore continue to work and hate each other, continue to work their lives off, so that few pathological narcissists can continue to, amass resources that they don't need, accumulate, hoard. So therefore, we ought to go back to fear generating mechanisms as social psychological principles, and how those who have extreme forms of psychopathology should be dissuaded from holding power, just as Hitler was a pathological man. We ought
almost
to
as though everyone
yeah.
that's looking to, let's say, run for office should get tested psychologically.
I agree, José.
Or
It's
even,
not,
or even like just
capacity
the
for leadership.
like that. What is it, like the lie detector test? Like, you see people in military. I find this. I want. Yeah, I think for many, people in military, you have to go through harder, strenuous tests to be brought in, to
Yeah,
continuously being checked
absolutely.
in, to
Yeah,
lead a battalion, to lead a group of folks. But we don't do that in politics.
exactly. Yeah,
and
yeah.
and sorry, it just had an epiphany moment. I'm listening
Exactly.
to you.
Absolutely. And not only that, even for MBA, even for some of the college admissions, the students have to complete a personality test and so on and so forth. But we don't do that for leaders who are, especially leaders of powerful nations, where that how their behavior impacts the entire humanity. There are many, developing parts of the world, like for instance, African nations and parts of Middle East, where this level of this sort of authoritarian leadership, is favored as opposed to participatory leadership or democratic leadership or servant leadership, which is where, so many of my college presidents, for instance, at my university, or including the current president, or servant leadership. They focus on service. How can they serve the community? How can they serve the students, all the stakeholders of the internal environment of the college campuses, as well as the community where the university sits? And there are many governors, for instance, current governors in some of the states in the United States, who are absolute servant leaders who want to serve the people for which they're elected to. Then we have autocratic leaders who are engendering, like in Myanmar, what's happening. The minority Rohingya population has been, ruled by ICC in 2020 in the International Criminal Court as having engaged in the Myanmar government as indicators of genocide. And now the case is being taken up again by the Gambia, and they're holding hearings. So there are various parts of the world where you can drive the fundamental reason for conflict and fundamental reason for othering and fundamental reason for toxic fear in the macro level domains that seeps into micro level as pathological leaders. If we have a way of electing leaders who are noble, who are honest, who are not there to amass wealth for themselves and their families, who are not there to destroy other people's lives, who are not there to take vengeance, who are not there to, deprive other peoples of their fundamental constitutionally enshrined rights, then our societies would be far better off and there would be less toxic fear. There would be the necessary level of adaptive fear, but people will be more productive, more helping, more collaborative, which is our basic nature. Anyone who believes that human beings are fundamentally flawed are themselves flawed because they view this world through their flawed sense of selfishness. Human beings are fundamentally loving, collaborating, playful, creative, productive, fellowship oriented social beings. Until we acknowledge that and construct our systems to reflect those values, we would keep relying on men and women who are entirely unfit to govern. And today we have majority of the leaders are men. Therefore, men with unresolved pathological issues to be the leaders. And then when they use the term, oh, he's a man child, I just almost cringe. Yes, children are also helpless, and psychologists come up with this finding that most of the pathological leaders are infantile helplessness. They are so helpless in how to live. The only way they know how to live is by controlling others, which is like, if we think about human beings, our infants, our children are completely helpless, but they are not going to destroy themselves, right? They're helpless. And there is a reason, because human beings, love is our fundamental nature. Therefore, our process of this extreme dependence on our significant caretakers is to prolong that attachment, that love, the sense of knowing that we are going to be taken care of, we are going to be protected, we are going to be nurtured, we are going to be surrounded with an environment of love and esteem, and that are capable to unleash our potentials. So we are not hardwired to believe somehow those who gave birth to us or those who are supposed to take care of us are going to turn around and hurt us. That's where the basic fundamental trauma of human beings comes in, when children experience this neglect and abuse at the hands of their principal caretakers. So therefore, those leaders who have this helplessness to take care of themselves, other than to make other people work for them and grift other people and not pay people who have given them service, and to hoard money, and to pass violate the rules of law, and to pass laws that would help them hoard money and upset the economic market. Those should not be called as man-child. Those should be called as those leaders with infantile helplessness that is so pathological that they do not mind destroying others, because adults have the capacity to, especially when they are given unlimited power, have the capacity to destroy others. Therefore, if we want to prevent toxic fear society, we need to educate the parents to be absolutely protective, caring, nurturing parents, and train our youth in schools and parenting skills. And we require a license for marriage, but we don't require a license for parenting. It's a procreational capacity is a fundamental civil right. We don't want to go there. It's everybody's right to procreate, but at the same time, we want our children. Children have rights too. Their rights need to be protected. They have a right to protective, nurturing, caring environment where their fundamental needs are met. A society needs to be, especially a rich society, needs to be able to provide adequate safety net for our children to be able to have those fundamental quality of living. Any politician who comes and argues against healthcare for children, against healthcare for older adults who worked all their lives, is fundamentally engaging in socially negligent, almost bordering on criminal behavior. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for also, you delved into some of my upcoming questions on like, how would you distinguish between, and let me know if you have anything additionally you want to add to, like, how would you distinguish between adaptive fear and toxic fear in social and organizational systems? I think it's important to, as we talk about fear, I think for most folks listening in, that we can reflect upon some memory where we felt the emotion of fear, whether it was, whatever path our lives has taken us, whether it's in a household, whether it's at school, at work, going into neighborhoods maybe you're not common, or just many times it comes on from doing something that's out of your routine, that uncomfortable feeling, but also from fear as a system, though. From a systems perspective, how is fear produced, amplified, sustained within our institutions, communities, or nations? I mean, I think in this case, we're thinking of it from like, well, turn on the news. And I would think most people would probably see or hear something that would instill some fear. And maybe it may not be immediate, but there's that uncomfortableness of like, that doesn't sit right with me. That there's something about, my own values and ethics, I have a moral dilemma about what I'm experiencing right now. And sometimes we shift to like, what can we do to, whether it's protest, be activists, like, or even if it's as simple as like just letting one of your loved ones know about, hey, did you hear about this? Because not everyone's on the same wavelength, or this listening to the same stuff, and it creates an opportunity for that conversation, as opposed to just sustaining it in, which then just leads to a lot of frustration and uncomfortableness just eventually boiling up, which can lead to other forms of emotions. But yeah, so I'm just kind of going through the process for folks who are listening in, just trying to help them try to guide themselves, and sometimes that fear itself leads to the othering that we talk about, because it's easier to place blame on, oh, it's because of those people that this is happening. Well, maybe those people are not there, then this wouldn't be happening, and I wouldn't have this feeling of fear anymore. Because and and truly, and this is just beyond like the concept of like fake news. And yeah, I think it's actually one of the latest stories I read about was, I forget which court it was. They ruled on, in the past, if you publish fake news, fake articles, you needed to have like a headline stating it was. You don't need to do that anymore, which is
Mm.
atrocious. Because then
Yeah.
it's like, how do you go down the rabbit hole of all this? But yeah, so when it comes to the othering, at what point does the fear into othering, what do you see as a tipping point where dialogue maybe just becomes impossible, almost impossible? And how does, yeah, I don't know if there's, how does othering distort not only how we see others, how we understand ourselves? And I truly do believe a lot of conflict happens because people are not talking to each other. I mean, whether it's on the
Mhm.
national level, on the macro
Mhm.
or micro level, I always ask people like, well, have those folks actually talked to each other?
Yeah.
Are they actually having conversations?
Mhm.
Uh, and, or, just because they have a gathering or a meeting, like, it's, you are not going to have a good relationship with a complete stranger just because you talk to them like every 6 months.
Yeah.
um, and so it's like, how do you nurture that? And obviously that's not being done because it's the self-interest and what can they get out of it. And so yeah, so as I just kind of go down this
No, no, I'm
thoughts on
listening.
othering and the
You
collapse
yeah.
of,
Yeah.
it's really
Very
just a
interesting.
collapse
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
recognition, recognizing the human being for themselves and who they are as a living creature with thoughts and mindsets and intelligence. And um, all of that is just
Mhm.
forgotten, thrown
Yeah.
out. I don't know if you have examples, personal,
Yeah,
professional,
absolutely.
where you
Yeah.
witness fear-driven othering block the possibility for
Yeah.
peace. I mean, I think we see it every day on the
Yeah.
news, unfortunately,
Yeah.
and it is a culture of fear that keeps getting
Mhm.
nurtured.
Mhm.
And part of it is also just the rapidness of information of like, oh wait, this is what we're handling today. And
Mhm.
then I think the other day I was mentioning to someone, I was like,
Mhm.
if you go back, let's say 6 months, pick a random
Mhm.
day, and just what was what was in the news, and you don't have to look it up. If you can just remember what was in the news that made you feel uncomfortable, most people would probably not remember, even if it was like a month ago.
Mhm.
Most people would not remember. I think it's those pivotal moments. It's like, I think I like to think most people would remember a global pandemic, something that we all collectively went
Mhm.
through, and there was this fear, obviously, and within that,
Mhm.
it led to the
Mhm.
othering once more. It wasn't just okay, got to take care of each other, but it was also like misconstrued news, and yeah, it's just I find that there's these conflicts, incidents that happen in history, and they are missed opportunities for to build community, to have those conversations, um,
Mhm.
because sometimes it's more comfortable to just forget about it, ignore it, and go about your daily routine.
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. I want to, you asked for examples of how this
yeah.
othering continues to make people distrustful of each other. Trust is a fundamental mechanism that we need human beings. It's our one of our needs to be able to trust at least someone, or another group or and the community that we live in. But distrustful mechanisms happen when we don't have curiosity, to learn, and when we don't want to know, and when we don't have humility, cultural humility, intellectual humility, spiritual humility, and when we don't understand that information can be skewed in any way to present a certain way. It's all about presentation. One of my professors told me, how you present something, especially in law, how you present something is everything. How you present the facts and how you marry the facts to the law. And so good lawyers would look at facts and antecedents and its current manifestations and how it has been discussed in prior rulings and how it is discussed now in the contemporary conversations, and then, decide whether this is something that they would accept to work on or not. Likewise, in life, I can give you a solid example. For instance, when I first started teaching diversity, one of the classes I mainly teach research and research methods and supervise students for thesis and their capstone projects. But I also teach policy and total quality management and so on and so forth. And one semester, for maybe not one, like 4 semesters, I taught diversity. So one of the questions that was asked from me when I introduce myself and say, my formative years were spent in India, and then I, came to United States, and then I would be asked questions like, "Oh, is it true that in India they husbands kill their own wives so that they can marry again and get dowry?" And now India has 1.3, at that time it was 1 point close to 2 billion, not million, population. And so, and yes, dowry deaths do take place. Maybe in a year, there are, in one year, which we have some statistics of, there were about 6,000 and little more deaths that were attributed to dowry, the practice of dowry that took place in India. But at the same year, in United States, in the number of women who were murdered by their intimate partners, spouses, and boyfriends were around the same. This was before, this was actually not before, few years after we passed the Prevention of Violence Against Women Act in the United States in 1996. And we passed that act because the then Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, went and testified in front of the Congress and said, the greatest form of terrorism is taking place in our own homes, that's in America, where women are increasingly being murdered by those whom they presume to love them and protect them. But since then, the number of women who die from intimate partner violence has come down in the United States. But, even now, every year, 1,200 to 1,500 women die at the hands of intimate partner violence. Or dowry that's taking place in India? Absolutely. So my point is there are two societies, one that considers itself advanced and well-educated, very wealthy, and the other that is now has the great, GDP and great economic growth, and maybe not GDP, but, great economic growth and greater opportunities and, and education and so on and so forth. And as a single mom, I am entirely grateful for everything that I can do in the United States that I may not be able to do in other parts of the world. Having raised my 3 children who are in their 30s, all in their 30s, and as a grandmother, I can say United States, when follows its rule of law and follows these policies that have been established since 1935, when we established the New Deal, and President Johnson's the war on poverty and related programs, we were progressing really in a phenomenal way with the passage of 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, all of those factors, and we were perfecting ourselves. So that doesn't mean United States doesn't have problems. It's a society just like every other society that has problems. India is growing, thriving, and it has a historical, trajectory that was disrupted by the colonization. British went and colonized it and took their resources. And any time a nation's history is, compartmentalized by the forces of power and, somewhat corrupt power at that, and make a nation feel like they are inadequate to govern themselves, that has a lasting impact on individuals, and pedagogy of the oppressed take place when a nation that considers itself advanced goes and oppresses the nation of other countries for their own economic greed. Then those nations who are the colonized, and these days we are not even allowed to use the word oppression, and the education of what is in this history of human trajectories, progress, and conflicts are also discouraged. So when information is curtailed, as it was curtailed then, when the sense of dignity of the people taken away from them, countries will go through process of problems, and that's what India is going through. That's what United States went through. We were colonized by the British too, and so many sacrificed to get our freedom, to have those constitutionally enshrined, rights and privileges, and that could all be thrown out the window if we have the wrong kind of individuals who lack curiosity, who lack humility, and who are happy to be ethnocentric. Ethnocentrism is a sociological term, as you know, Jose, which says somehow our culture is the supreme culture. No culture on the face of this planet has the right to say they are the supreme culture, because I can find, just as any curious person can find, something entirely detrimental about that culture. Norwegian culture, the current form of society, I applaud because of the emphasis on human rights, safety net, and their for taxation policy, and where when they say if corporations are going to use people for their labor and benefit from that benefits of that should be shared with the nation, and they do tax the corporations at a much higher rate than we do in our own country. So, but at the same time, alcoholism is rampant in Norway. The intimate partner violence does exist in Norway, but do they have a higher representation of women in their parliament? Absolutely. And Denmark, does it have problems? Yes, there are pockets of racism in Denmark too. Every society has its own problems, but at the same time, to some societies saying, oh, that's what they do. So I explain to my students, because you're going to be helping other people, you have double the duty to educate themselves, to have this cultural humility, to have the curiosity, to have the critical thinking, to understand, hey, this happens in their culture, and this happens in our culture too, in a different form. How can we help each other? How can we all join hands to throw away all that is unproductive in human history, and that raises its head again and again, like an octopus, with its hate, with its divisiveness, with its fear. After all, those of us who believe in any spiritual form, I'm not saying organized religious indoctrination, but any true spiritual form, whether it's Christianity or Hinduism or Islam or Buddhism or Jainism or Jewish traditions, we all want, they all, emphasize love, hope, cherishing each other, fellowship, solidarity, cooperation, collaboration. No spiritual discipline is saying, go and take what doesn't belong to you. Go and, accumulate, unleash your greed. They say, no, unleash your charity, unleash your hope, unleash your love. And so therefore, we ought to be very, very careful when someone tries to make us afraid of other nations, our neighbors, members of our fellow humanity who take refuge by saying they are the rapists when the leaders here are supposedly engaging in similar behavior, right? And so, therefore, we ought to be engaging in critical thinking and trying to understand that human beings everywhere have deviant behavior. Some human beings have it at a much higher rate. Let's keep those individuals who have a very high rate of deviance from positions of power that can influence entire trajectories of societies and destroy that which has been built over decades in a matter of months. We don't want that.
Thank you. As we, just try to provide some hope for
Hope. Yes, I
yes, we can
absolutely
always have
love
hope.
hope. Yes,
Yes,
we have to
you
have
know,
hope. Yes.
um, so as I reflect and activists, not just now, people protesting, but in history, just like the courage, uh, the collective practice of people coming together. Um, how do you, how can courage be cultivated through education, socialization, workplace culture, rather than left to these individual heroism? Like you don't really, in certain fields, maybe in education, you might hear about, you might learn about the activism, but rarely is it practice or put theory to practice, implied or like there's rarely conversations about courage. Um, and I just wonder if you have any ideas on how we could cultivate that. Also in like the workplace culture, many times you have a job and it's like you do something for the produce or the product, and you're there at a job to perform a task, and that's that, and make money for you, for them, but never about like, oh, I don't think you should be doing that on on the work hours. What is this idea of courage? Or if anything, I think that would instill fear in the leadership because there is power to being able to, and maybe that's part of education too, the power of that you have of your class of um, so yeah, just would love to
Yeah.
see how can uh, what conditions could make it safer for people to take moral or relational risks in moments of conflict. Also is another one that kind of, but yeah, just the concept of courage. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have been discussing, Jose, and you know this because you are an expert in, alternative dispute resolution and you teach that. And fundamentally, we need to be able to believe that every human being is capable of change and every human being is a leader. And that needs to start from our K through 12 system. Right. And there are the current generation and our, youngest, our youth are far more engaged and are far more disillusioned because disillusion can bring about, courage to act, but also courage to act on what values. We are becoming a society that is devoid of values because of the leaders who do not manifest important values. So therefore, we need to be able to create a society where our youth and our, adults, those in the age group of 15 to 44, need to be able to engage in courageous leadership and engage in healing. And right now, our society needs to be healed. There's a lot that's happening that ordinary Americans and ordinary citizens everywhere are trying their best to take care of their family's needs, pay their mortgages, and most of them pay their rent. Many of them don't have home ownership, and to be able to afford healthcare with a fiasco on this big beautiful bill that takes away the already established norms around healthcare. And so it is almost impossible for anyone to say that we don't need collaboration. We don't need cooperation. We don't need trust. We don't need hope. We don't need healing. First of all, for healing to happen, as we see in mediation and in negotiation and all of those, there has to be an acknowledgement that there are mechanisms that are outside the control of individuals that are creating pain. Like if I have a control over preventing pain, would I not follow those mechanisms? Absolutely, right? Every human being would. But we are living in a society where most human beings do not have the control to prevent mechanisms that are causing them pain and that are causing them fear. When that pain becomes chronic stress, that creates this heightened vigilance, this heightened alarm. That is toxic fear. So now we have both toxic fear and chronic pain and lack of resources, not because we don't have resources, because few individuals decided upon themselves that they are going to hoard all the resources and that let the majority of the people suffer for themselves. But lo and behold, those few who are hoarding all these resources would soon be in the 80s and 90s, and they are not going to be even able to take care of themselves, relegated to, dementia probably or Alzheimer's. And there is one man who comes and claims he's not going to die because apparently he's injecting himself with the plasma of his own child. And I'm like, well, that person needs to be prevented from saying such statements that are traumatizing for others, because those of us who consider our children as sacred and also, who are given to us by God to be able to, take care of them and formulate them as responsible, productive, contributing, healthy adults, right, in society. So everyone has to die, irrespective of whatever, individuals with pathology might claim. We are mortal beings. Mortality and some of our fear actually comes from that sense of mortality. But healthy individuals have adaptive fear, and the toxic fear is generated because of the conditions of the society. So when we acknowledge that there are mechanisms operating that are outside our control, our agency is being taken away because our free will, that's a uniquely, human attribute. And so when that is being taken away and held hostage by those who bring about, use the mechanisms put in place to assure our safety, to murder our own fellow citizens, and to disobey our laws, and to create absolute power for themselves, and to co-opt the mechanisms of law, to engage in killings that are outside the parameters of judiciary purview and overview, outside the parameters of rule of law, and to be able to withhold majority of our country's wealth in the hands of the few, to be able to make it possible and to spend it in ways that make absolutely no sense, in creating documentaries, for instance, that have no educational value for anyone, or in creating building changes that do not meet the needs of the American people, or to bring about changes to our nationally renowned institutions of passes of knowledge and art and responsiveness to human needs, as relegating them to the whims and fancies of those few, then we ought to, ask ourselves, what happened to our courage? And so schools ought to be able to teach hope, healing, and courage. They need to be able to, acknowledge the fact our children have now about 45 to 50% of our children have quote unquote mental health problems. I detest the word mental health problems because they are not mental health problems that are socially engendered stress factors for our children. We create and unleash AI without guardrails on how our children are being exploited by them. We unleash social media without any mechanisms for preventing that these companies do not act in careless ways. We unleash, expectations on the parents of these children to work themselves to death, to work themselves to sickness, and then say, make sure that your children are mentally healthy. How can a mother who works graveyard shifts and and her husband who works full week can help their children with homework, attend parent-teacher conference, be active in the school board, and to be able to understand how educational curricula are, being delivered and whether their children are able to receive music instruction, because that increases their abstract intelligence, their connective thinking with games like chess and other, intellectually stimulating, fun-filled, practices, debates, clubs. Every child should be given an opportunity to be part of that, not just $50,000 a year private schools that should be able to afford that. Every child in America has the right to receive the best education and the best extracurricular activities to be able to actualize their potential. And the men and women who are adults should have the courage to advocate. At least the men and women whom we have elected and sent to the Congress should have the courage to act on the interests of the people, not on the fear of a tyrant. That's true of all countries where people elect leaders and send them to their, the respective representatives, bodies. So this needs to be the new, trajectory of human beings, that we create courageous beings who are going to be servant leaders, who are going to be participative leaders, who are going to be democratic leaders, not authoritative, corrupt, hoarding narcissists who are man-child or who are, infantile, helpless individuals with unmet needs, who are not going to use humanity for satisfying their own, pathological and devious, cravings. And so it is, sad to witness that, but that doesn't mean that is not cause for hope. That is cause for courage. That's cause for hope, because the more we see that, the more manifestations of it we see, the more reason for all of us to come together. There are many, many leaders, professors from many parts of the world who are starting sort of this groups of like-minded individuals to be able to research, to be able to advocate for community-based collaborative ventures that would be courage building and hope building and healing. I have a lot of hope. I think we are going through just a temporary phase of this erosion of our fundamental rights and, erosion of empathy and erosion of dignity and decency in public domains. And the America that I value has all of these things, decency and dignity and hope and healing. And it happens in all parts of America, and it happens in other parts of the world. And I believe that we will rise to the occasion and literally, unleash those forces of compassion, empathy, both cognitive and affective empathy, to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of our fellow human beings, brothers and sisters, and, empathize with them and also understand the reasons for their suffering, and try to prevent them. So I have hope. I think my children are in a generation where there are many of them who are entirely ethical, entirely hope-filled, and entirely, in respectful interactions with their fellow human beings, respect the rights of others. And my grandchildren, I already see them, in terms of their own sense of justice, and they want sense of their right to the space that they occupy. And so I have a lot of hope. And it's not just mine. There are many grandmothers who would say that, Jose. And I'm sure you would say that about your daughters in terms of how they are, processing this information to shape, to mold themselves in the form that you and your wife have a model that set for them in terms of engaging with the community. I mean, you are, after all, doing this to
Thank
help
you.
others. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
As we are coming to just want to be conscientious of time.
Yeah.
Really just want to touch upon briefly designing systems of dignity and peace. What would you say is, how do we design institutions that metabolize fear rather than amplify it?
Oh,
is
yeah.
it psychological exams? Is it training? Maybe it's all of it. I know you touched upon some of it, but I'm just wondering, what small, often overlooked practices can reinforce humanity and recognition in polarized environments? It starts, you kind of talked about, like, right in the household, right, with our loved ones. That's where it starts. But obviously we can't do everything. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, just wondering,
Well, yeah.
especially, like, for our listeners, it could take away, one shift in how they can understand fear and conflict. What would you hope it would be?
No, absolutely. I mean, we have examples, for instance, Jose, other countries where, like, for instance, Iraq, Saddam Hussein, he was a dictator, right? And Saddam Hussein and his sons perpetrated enormous amount of control and enormous amount of hoarding wealth. And United States, we used under the illusion of weapons of mass destruction. Later we learned that's not true. But then anyway, we went to war and Saddam Hussein was deposed. And then did the country go through a resurgence of hope, independence, sense of freedom? And it takes a long time for a country to come away feeling they want sense of destiny and they want sense of hope, and takes time to heal from a tyrant's activities. And so likewise, the countries that don't do a good cost benefit analysis, are going to repeat the same thing. Countries who don't learn from history will repeat the same mistakes. And for instance, to give you an example, like you said, we want to do all of this in raising our children, the love and everything, but we can't do it by ourselves. Our schools have to cooperate. Our communities have to cooperate. Our policies have to be family friendly. Our policies have to be universal childcare must be a fundamental if they expect women to have children and for mothers and fathers to raise healthy families. They need to be able to help the families afford raising children, right? So we don't do a good cost benefit analysis. For instance, there are hundreds of thousands of children in the United States, in the wealthiest nation in the world, that are called as latchkey children. What are latchkey children? They wear a chain around their neck with the key to their homes. After school, they go by themselves and open their apartment or home, and they provide self-care for themselves. And we have statistics that show majority of the children who are in correctional, under the supervision of Correctional Youth Authority, or have engaged in behavior that landed them there during the hours of after school, from about 3 to 6 or 7, before their parents came home. So we have the facts. What have we as a society done? A society run by leaders with aspirations and love and compassion and empathy for all of the people whom they are serving as a leader would say, let's create nationwide an after-school education program where parents who are working will be able to afford free of charge this after school education program where children would go from their classroom directly to that in their own school, where they don't have to go outside, and to be just like what Boys and Girls Club does, right? It's a nonprofit, small level organization. It's all over the country, but it's operating out of the goodness and goodwill of foundations and individuals who believe in the future of America. But we can make it mainstream and then provide help for children with their homework and some basic nutrition, like a pre-dinner meal, and someone to nurture them and protect them during if they have something that's going on in their lives that is stress inducing. Instead, we say, okay, let these children go home. We will, take them to Correctional Youth Authority after they have entered into some, mostly due to peer influence or something unsupervised, and then they end it. Then we would pay, and then we remove them from the protect and the love of their parents who are traumatized. Everybody is traumatized. There's a human cost to that kind of trauma. Then there's a tremendous cost to trauma to children who, because of this occasional incident, end up with Correctional Youth Authority, come outside sometimes hardened in their attitude towards life, and have a highest preponderance to the criminal activity. And to give you a good example, for instance, after 9/11, researchers did a study 3 years after 9/11, and they've established the fact that those who were, when controlling for factors like, age and gender, these are, research terms, when they are held constant, still, those who were close to 9/11 had a significant reduction in the gray matter volume of their brain in amygdala and the other parts of the brain that control human emotion. So we have all the scientific data, we have all the scientific knowledge, and we don't have the courage to provide these public policies, which would cost far less than what it would cost to keep the children under Correctional Youth Authority, traumatize them, traumatize their parents. So we don't do good cost benefit analysis. So as a society, we should be able to have the will to follow our research findings, the will to follow what we know works in the best interest of the children based on our understanding of scientific background, and idiots who come in, sorry for using the word, but maybe I shouldn't use it, but those who don't value scientific contributions to society, and those who undermine in the trajectory of important organizations like World Health Organization and Center for Disease Control, and we have Food and Drug Administration, and so many other organizations that are looking out for the health of our children. So we already have measles outbreak, and we don't know what other outbreaks we are going to have in our country. So therefore, we need to be able to, look at the reality and say, let's not regress from our progress. Let us value our children's lives, and let us, to a large degree, do a cost benefit analysis and say, what are the benefits to our children, our adults, our parents, our older persons? For instance, there are other parts of the world, in Zimbabwe and in Latin America, in Brazil, for instance, they are having multi-generational projects where because these are societies, and Japan, Okinawa, for instance, where 3 generations live under one roof, isolation is less, engagement is high, and they benefit from the values of the older generation. No other parts of the world, the older generation is devalued as much as they are in the United States. We value youth tremendously, and the number of plastic surgeries and this and that, and appearance encouraging mechanisms, those are huge industries, billions and billions of dollars, instead of helping our adults live a better life, better nutrition, better time. For every workplace should have exercise rooms. It's not just Microsoft and Google that should have it. It should be every place that is, so they don't have to go after the work till 6 to 7 to work out, if they do at all. Then we would spend an enormous amount of money in diabetes care and cardiovascular care and so many other care that have to do with the lack of exercise, lack of adequate nutrition, and we don't reduce the prices of nutrition and balanced nutritious food. So many of the communities have corners, there's convenience stores where that's their grocery store, where they don't have access to fresh food. So To make this long story short, we spent money foolishly in areas where after the effect we have what is a reactive social welfare policy, not a proactive social welfare policy, where Hawaii, for instance, for a long time provided universal health insurance and universal home visiting, and Hawaii had the far less reduction. Almost they had eliminated child abuse and neglect during that period. But then they couldn't afford, there were funding reductions and home visitor program. Then they saw a resurgence of slightly increased, child abuse and neglect. So we know what we need to do. We know it's possible, but we don't have the political will to do, because those who come to power to get elected using people as the tool, but on the contributions of these companies and corporations, consider themselves beholden to the interests of the corporations and not to the interests of the people. And so people have to get together and decide how they want to exercise their voting rights. Most of the people, but a little more than half the eligible voters cast their votes in the last election. That's the apathy. Like, people feel like, oh, they don't want to choose between the fire and the frying pan. No, it's not. People need to educate themselves and ask their elected members of Congress to act on the promises that they made before they got elected, and at least have basic access to healthcare, balanced nutrition, safe housing, and community relationships, and social capital, and excellent education for our children, because our children deserve nothing less. Every child in America should have the best access to K through 12 education and higher education.
Thank you. Thank you for, you kind of answered my follow-up was like, what's one courageous question you believe peace builders should be asking more often? And so I think you clearly answered it with, just getting involved in the process.
Yeah, if I can say one more
becoming
thing,
knowledgeable. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, we talk of peace building, we talk of reconciliation, we talk of all of those mechanisms but peace cannot exist in a home that is that doesn't have sufficient resource, sufficient heat, for instance, or basic food, nutritious food, or someone to take the children to school and bring them back in a safe environment where both the parents are more or less happy. I'm not saying they should not have arguments. They might have arguments, but they have better ways of mediating those differences, and they have basic nurturance for spiritual upbringing. No matter what it is, children understand that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and to value that spirit and nurture that spirit in every way possible, irrespective of what they subscribe to. So all of that are absolutely requirements for peace, for reduction in conflict, and healthy mechanisms to engage each other. Yeah, I'll stop there. Yes.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughts and your insights. And as we come to a close, today's conversation just really reminds us that, once more, peace is simply not the absence of conflict. It's something that must be designed, practiced, protected. Fear, we talked about, especially when left unnamed or intentionally manipulated, has a way of quietly shaping our systems, our relationships, our sense of belonging, our own individual path. As we always say, got to kind of take care of ourselves first. And so we need to lean into this discomfort of fear to understand it better. And as we've explored fear, it is not a destiny. When we slow down, examine it honestly, and we refuse to let it define the boundaries of our lives, our imagination, new possibilities can definitely emerge. So, I always talk about, peace building, as this podcast is called, at its core, as something courageous of all of us to stay present when fear urges withdrawal, to choose curiosity when othering feels easier, and to build systems that center dignity, recognition, and shared humanity. So this work doesn't happen only in negotiation rooms or formal processes. It happens right in our homes, in our classrooms, workplaces, communities, everyday interactions. You're at the bus stop, wherever your daily life takes you, those you interact with. And even if you don't interact and you're just like putting on your headphones to listen to this podcast or listen to the latest song, there's things we can reflect upon. And I think that power of reflection is so powerful that rarely do we have time to do that. So, it's about small intentional choices can either reinforce the vision or create space for understanding. So our hope is that, these ongoing conversations encourages you to reflect not only on the conflicts around you, but also on the unseen fears shaping them and the role each of us can play in cultivating courage, compassion, and connection. If we walk away, I have found, referring back to reflection, some folks may journal, they may not journal, but a good practice is toward your end of your day, if you have just 15, 20 minutes, jot down whatever comes to mind. It is a wonderful practice of reflection of, oh, and I've been so surprised in my own practice of it, how I'm like, oh, I had no idea that interaction I had like earlier in the day was still lingering in my mind. And that's when it came about. So, and that's what I talk about, when whether it was a frustration, the fear that might just be in the background, we ignored it because there was so many other things that we've engaged in throughout the day. So thank you for being part of Peacebuilding Initiatives. We invite you to continue the dialogue, question assumptions, engage in the ongoing work of building a more just and peaceful world, one relationship, one system, and one courageous conversation at a time. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. It was
Thank
really a
you.
treat.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
taking the time to do
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
always.